All right, so we created our control chart using some fake data, the DICE data, right? And we were able to see the result of changing our process. If you missed that video, make sure to go back and check it. It explains this chart that's right up here on the screen. But we're going to use that same principle to actually work with some real data, okay? Some data that represents something a little more realistic. So that's this data over here on the left. So I have January 1st through January 21st, and I have my daily score. Okay, and I'm trying to convince my boss that my process got better, because if you look here, I mean, I've got 999 right here all in a row, right? And I've got these 988. But my boss comes back and says, nope, look at this, 5 in that month. You had three fives, four fives. It wasn't that great of a month. So I need to prove to him that, hey, my process is better. I have good scores. So what I'm going to do is create a chart. So I grab my data, insert a chart, and I'm like, hey boss, look at this chart. Look at this chart right here. Look at this. I went up. Yeah, sure, I had some fives in here, but look, I went up. Look how many upward trends here, and we're calling them trends. We're using that term loosely, but we're saying, look at all these upward trends I have, okay? And I'm trying to prove to my boss that, we're doing good. And he says, nope, look, 5. He points out the exact same thing that he just pointed out. And he even says, hey, look, see, there's another down day. It may not be a 5, but it's a 6. That's almost just as bad. So I'm kind of like, God, what can I do to prove to this guy that we're getting better? So I decide to create some upper and lower control limits. So now it's better than a line chart. We're creating a control chart. So I create upper control limit, lower control limit. And if you missed this in the last video, go back and look at it, because I'm going to just do this really fast, add in these control limits. So we're going to take the average of this data, okay, and then we're going to add it. We're going to add to the average a standard deviation of the same data, and we're going to multiply that standard deviation by 3. Okay, so our upper control limit is 11.44. And then we're going to do the same thing here, average the same data, okay? But instead of adding the standard deviation, we're going to subtract to get a lower control limit. Same data, okay? And we're also going to multiply it by 3. Now, if you missed what I did there, I know I did it quick. I want you to go back to the previous video and see how that's calculated, because this is critical. Now, I need to add this data into my chart. So I click on my chart, and I'm going to click Add Series, and just select my upper control limit. And then I'm going to add one more series and just select my lower control limit. Okay, so now we have an upper control limit and lower control limit. Now what that's telling me again is, statistically, it should be impossible with my current process to get a score up or below that. So I know my process will have improved if I get a score up above that upper control limit. Now, if I get a score below that lower control limit, I know my process has changed because I changed it, but that doesn't mean it changed for the better, right? So I'm going to use those control limits. So I tell my boss, hey, look, you know what? We were both wrong, because yeah, we have some ups and downs, but statistically, you said you didn't like these 5s, but our current process allows for these 5s. In other words, next week, we could get 5s again pretty easily. It would be statistically acceptable. I know it's not, business-wise, it's not acceptable, but statistically, it's acceptable. It's just like when I roll a die, I might want a 6, but it's perfectly acceptable for me to get a 1, even though that's not what I want. Same thing here. It's acceptable for me to get 5s, even though that's not what I want. So what we did is I went in and I changed my process. So I'm going to add some data here. So for the next 10 days, from the 22nd through the 31st, I think that's 10 days, I went through and I updated my process, and I collected some data, and I said, you know what, let's see if this improved. Okay, so I'm going to make my upper and lower control limits move down a little further. Okay, and then I'm going to add in some data. So I'm going to make my dates go a little bit further, because right now they're only going to A22. So I want to make them go all the way to A32. So I hit OK. All right, so now I have extra space on my chart and I want to add in. I'm going to hit make my data go further for my score, and then increase my upper control limit. Here, we'll just type this in 32. And this one will change to 32. Okay, so now we've got my chart again. I'm gonna make my chart bigger, that way we can really look at this. Okay, so now we updated our process, and I'm telling my boss, hey, it got better. And I can say with confidence, my process got better, because I statistically could not have achieved this data point right here, 13. This was statistically impossible. This number right here, I think those are 12s right there. Statistically impossible to get those numbers without changing my process. In other words, I did something to my process, whether it was remove a step or add a step, that has now increased my performance, and it statistically is proven. I can say it with confidence. So that's an example of a control chart using a little more realistic data.